So I started working with docents at the Corcoran Gallery many, many years ago when I was a graduate intern there. And this is a painting that was bought by William Wilson Corcoran and is now part of the National Gallery collection. Maybe Stephanie's familiar with it. She's probably familiar with it from living in Washington. And it's of a woman that Winslow Homer knew, and it was painted in Prousneck, Maine, and it is an oil canvas. So I was flashing back to this painting when I started preparing for this talk because I had to research this painting and present it to about 200 ladies. There were no men docents then, at one of their monthly, almost day-long meetings. And I must tell you, I was quite intimidated because one of them actually came up to me afterwards and said, well, Mark, whatever you told us is all very interesting, but I've been giving tours for 30 years and I'm not changing my tour. So at the time, I wasn't 30 years old. So, but I learned then that, you know, as I was facing the docents, that I really needed to keep their attention and get them to talk about the painting. And I think that's what we need to do at the Van Wezel with our audience. So I think one thing to keep in mind, and maybe as you're talking about references or even anything that's realistic, to remind the visitors about the fact that art history is a continuum that started way back when, if you go back to cave drawings, and then advanced over time to the present. And there's been a lot of high points and low points, and there have been great achievements, say in realistic sculpture and what most people like, which is what things they can recognize. And I think, you know, when you see a sculpture that references a person but doesn't look entirely realistic, you might say, well, you know, we reached the high point of realism in Greece in the 4th century with a sculptor such as Praxiteles, who carved this figure of Hermes on the left. And then after the Romans took over and made their empire, they started making copies of Greek sculptures. And while the one on the right is not a copy, it just gives you an example of a bronze that the Romans made. The other thing to remember is, you know, maybe remind people when they go around to museums that for one thing, usually when you go into a museum, you see like one object by an artist and then another object by another artist. And sometimes they're separated by hundreds of years. So museums and the Arts Advocates collection too is a collection of moments in time that were created by, right now, over 50 artists. So when we take a tour of the collection, we're looking at really isolated moments in time, these achievements by these individual artists that sometimes we can relate to the other paintings or the other artists in the collection, but sometimes we can't. So I think the goal of a tour is to try to tie together as many themes as possible, and as we go along, make references to things maybe that we've seen before or that we're going to see, or even point to things that are down the hall or across the wall or whatever. So the other thing to remember is that when we're looking at ancient art, like these two sculptures, the one that was made in the 4th century essentially disappeared until it was discovered in 1877. So, you know, as far as we're concerned, it vanished from history until about 150 years ago. And the one on the right also disappeared and was found in an excavation in 1738 because it disappeared during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. And until a group of Germans started excavating Herculaneum, this sculpture didn't exist in anybody's memory or at all. So I'm not sure that most people think about that all the time when they're looking at art in a museum. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so we just looked at those two Greek and Roman sculptures that are very realistic, and we could project ourselves into those forms because they look like people, well, not exactly like people walking around unless you know somebody who goes to Gold's Gym, but I mean, they're people that are recognizable. But after the fall of the Roman Empire, when the barbarians sort of overran the whole empire, all that knowledge about how to make a realistic sculpture disappeared, as well as a lot of other things like the formula for concrete, believe it or not. The reason the Romans were able to build aqueducts and such amazing, the Colosseum and so forth, because they knew the formula for concrete, which was really lost until the Renaissance when it was rediscovered again. And so we see the return to realism and a kind of high point in our culture during the 15th and 16th century, during the Renaissance, when you have artists like Donatello, who made David on the left.
I'll have to sign off, Suzanne. Let me sign off and then.
And
you don't see money, you don't.
And Michelangelo on the right. Wait a second. Okay. Michelangelo on the
okay.
right.
I'll sign off.
David.
Okay. I'll get you.
Okay. Okay, so the other thing I guess in talking about sculpture is also helping people understand the difference between additive sculpture and reductive sculpture. In order to make a bronze, you have to make a plaster mold. You have to make you have to create something, and then you have to make a mold of it, and then you have to the Donatello was made with lost wax process. But on the right, you have a marble, which is reductive. So Michelangelo decided to attack this enormous block of marble that had been sitting around Florence for years, and no one had been willing to do anything with it. And he was challenged to carve a figure of David out of this solid block of marble. So he had to know about math and science and proportion to be able to envision the David inside this block of marble, and then flawlessly carve this 17-foot figure of David, which you can see in Florence today. So I don't know how much any of you are accustomed to getting into the sort of the technique behind things, but I think it helps understand the achievement of the work of art, certainly. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so the other thing about the Renaissance was, and the reason I connect it with contemporary art sort of as the beginning of contemporary art, is that the artists such as Michelangelo called themselves creators, which was blasphemous at the time, because in the Renaissance, the church ruled over everything, and only God was the creator. And for an artist to claim they were a creator or a genius was really unthinkable. But because Michelangelo was such an exceptional artist, he was given a pass. But if you think about today, artists, they claim they're unique, and hopefully they are, and we celebrate that. But that is not something that was true really until I would say the Renaissance. So I think the period of artists claiming that they could make the rules started with Michelangelo. Okay, so if we could have the next slide, please. All right, so in the collection, we have many artists who thought that the way they approached art was unique, and they wanted to pass it onward and to share it. So many of the artists, I would say more than half the artists in the collection had their own schools. And so they came to Sarasota in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and established schools. And Hilton Leach was one. And the photograph on the bottom there is of him in the 40s teaching a class on the grounds of the Ringling Museum. And in the middle is a studio, his studio, which was designed by him, by Jack West for him in 1960. And then it's been a home since the Leaches sold it, and it just recently sold.
I got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So, and then we have Jerry Farnsworth, who's pictured there in the lower right, who also came here and established an art school, and everybody painted outside, and here he is painting outside. And we're going to talk about this figure of a woman in a few minutes. Okay, the next slide, please. And then the Hartmans, William and Martha Hartman, moved here in the 40s as well and set up a gallery, and one of the first galleries in town, and a school. And this watercolor was purchased about 10 years ago for the collection from William Hartman Jr., who some of you may know has a gallery on Palm Avenue downtown. So the circus was great place to go for artists who lived here when the circus wintered here, which it did for many, many years. So it's a great place for inspiration, to meet people, to take art classes, and so forth. William Hartman always maintained reference in his work, never made purely abstract work. On the other hand, Sid Solomon, who moved here in 1946 as well, started off painting realistically and then painted purely abstractly. So by the time that he was living in this house, which you see in the photograph with his wife Annie, it's a house that was designed by Jean Leedy, who's one of the Sarasota School architects. It was designed for them in the 70s. Sid used to have people, he had lessons at this house, and the studio is actually behind us. We're looking at the house. There was a bridge. The house was right on the beach, and then there was a bridge that connected to his studio behind it. Okay, the next one, please. Okay, so this is a little bit about me again. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm trained as an art historian. I decided as an undergraduate, I wanted to work with objects, and I was really mystified why we didn't go to the Philadelphia Museum of Art more often, and we sat in rooms like we're doing right now, looking at slides, instead of walking the 20 minutes to the museum and actually looking at objects. So I decided that I wanted to work with objects, and I love the Philadelphia Museum. So there were no courses in museum studies back in the 70s. So I found in the course guide a course in the American Civilization Department that was called the Museum in American Life. And so the summer after I graduated, I audited that course. And it was held at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And because the instructor's wife was the curator at the museum, the class was held in the boardroom of the art museum, which was a pretty impressive place to have a class. And the room had 30 Mary Cassatt paintings in it. So I learned a lot about Mary Cassatt's work just with being in that classroom every week for the summer. But I believe that the object has a presence, and it absorbs all the energy of the artist's experience with what you're looking at. Not this slide, of course, but we're actually looking at the painting. And it has a kind of aura, I believe. I believe that energy is palpable on some level. And especially if you course your eyes across the surface of a canvas or a sculpture or a drawing or whatever it is, and you can sort of trace the journey of the artist throughout the work, and discover how it was created, and every little minute brushstroke and decision that was made regarding it, as far as color goes, and placing it on the surface and what have you. And so when I give tours, I try to get people excited about that and to recognize that. And I think in an age when we are in the news, as you've probably read, there's now this new sort of craze for digital art, and somebody paid some ridiculous amount of money, 47 million or something, for a work of digital art, and they paid for it with like in Bitcoin, with in a token, which isn't cash, and you buy them, and then you own this virtual currency, which I can't wrap my head around yet. I think it's like sort of akin to the tulip mania that happened in Holland in the 17th century. But it's with us, so we're going to have to adapt to it. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, so here we have two paintings that are in the collection that have a related theme. And okay, now I'm going to throw it all out to you. And I'd like to hear from you. What sort of questions do you think that these two artists asked themselves before they made these paintings? Does anybody want to jump in? Okay, well, I'll start this off then. I maintain that every work of art is the answer to a question that an artist asks themselves. They set themselves up with a challenge. You know, I want to do a painting of circus performers. So how am I going to do that? How big is the canvas going to be? Well, is it going to be an oil painting, or is it going to be a pastel? You have a pastel on the right and oil painting on the left. How am I going to get the information to make this painting? Am I just going to make it up? Am I going to go to the winter quarters and watch a performance? Or am I going to take a camera? Am I going to take pictures and then come back to the studio? Am I going to take little panels or paper and pastels, or panels, little panel paintings, a little piece of wood and my oil paints, and actually make oil sketches while I'm watching this performance? What palette am I going to choose? Am I going to do specific portraits of individual performers, or am I going to generalize, in which I can, in fact, be more creative? How many figures am I going to put in the composition? How many planes of space am I going to have? Am I going to have a foreground, a middle ground, and a background, which seems to be what the case is in these two works? What's my palette going to be? How much action do I want to try to convey in the painting? And so you get the idea here about all the questions that the artists are asking themselves as they are contemplating the painting before they start it, and then what happens when they're actually executing it. And of course, in a pastel, there's less room for forgiveness, because every time you put the pastel on the sheet of paper, you're making a commitment, which really is, you can't erase it. You really can't go back. The pastel medium is less forgiving than oil paint, where you can paint over it. Of course, oil paint takes a couple of days to dry, and even longer if you're working in your garage in humid Florida. But you can go back in and paint over with an oil paint in an oil painting. And so for me, when I look at these, I think, well, okay, at some point, both these artists decided that the painting was finished, or the pastel was finished, and they were happy with it, and they signed it, and then they released it. You know, they released it hopefully to a gallery and a buyer, or they just released it to storage in their garage or wherever they store their painting until it could be sold or given away or whatever. But I also think that every painting, and this really comes from my conversation with living artists about their work when I've organized exhibitions, because I'm really curious about the process and how artists make decisions about what they're doing and effectively how they decide when it's finished. And again, I've learned that every painting, every drawing, every sculpture is the answer to some question. And then usually the process of making that raises a lot more questions. And then the artist wants to make a lot more work to try to answer those other questions. So I'm curious what your thinking is about what I just said, if anybody wants to share.
Are you asking if we have some response to that?
Yes, yes.
Is it always about a question, or is it sometimes leaving your mind wide open and seeing what sort of comes out? It's like how you sometimes blurt out something without thinking first in speech. Is that something that happens to an artist as well, that they go off topic, so to speak? Is that something that happens?
Oh, yes. No, I call those kinds of works, I call transitional works, because transitional works, like in an oeuvre of an artist's work, like in a body of work by an artist. Because when I go into a studio and I see, and that's really a privilege, I think, to go into an artist's studio, and because they're very vulnerable there, because everything's there, all their work, all their sketches, the things they tack on a bulletin board, their books that they read, everything is there for a curator to see. And so as my eye goes around the room, and an artist will tell you, well, I'm not happy with this work. I don't feel like I achieved what I wanted to, or this one's not finished. I'm not happy with that. And then they'll say they're happy with these other ones. And so I'll look at the ones they're not happy with, and I'll think, well, what didn't you like about this? And they might say, well, something like you just said, Jeanette. Well, they won't use the word, something just blurted out, but they'll say, well, I've been trying to work on this issue of the composition, but I'm not really happy with it, or I'm not happy with this palette, or something about it doesn't satisfy them. So that's why I would call it transitional work. But when I'm organizing exhibitions like retrospectives and things, I always include that work, because I think it's important for the artist as well as the public to see, what comes between really high achievement in someone's like 10-year career. Because it also, usually when artists are blurting things out, they are germinating a thought about something and it's not resolved. But if they didn't blurt it out, then they would never get to resolve it, because they would never have a chance to see it. Does that make sense, Jeanette?
Well, the blurting out might turn them in another direction. Is that possible?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. Yes, okay. That it's a direction that they're heading in, but it's not a clear path yet. It's like a zigzag or whatever. But it's hard to get artists to admit to that. Once it really is. I did an interview with an artist. I spent from 8 in the morning until 8 at night with him. I had a tape recorder the whole time. And we went to his studio, we went to the foundry, we had lunch, we had dinner. And he wouldn't admit to anything. Anything that I observed, he admitted to nothing. So, but I didn't know him that well then. And then 2 years later, I had lunch with him, and he said, that day we spent 12 hours together. He said, a lot of the things you observed, I can see now. But to your point, Jeanette, I think a lot of artists, because they're in the moment, because it is subconscious, maybe, what's going on. I'm not saying that everything an artist does is totally planned. I agree with you that that it has to be intuitive. You know, I think the best paintings are a combination of planning and intuition, and I think that somehow is you see that. You know, I mean, I think both these paintings are marvelous that we're looking at, and but like, look at, you can see that it's interesting. It's sort of similar palettes. I don't know whether that's the light of the circus or what have you, but like in the one on the left, you certainly can talk about where the light source is coming from, right? Where's the light source coming from? Would you say in the Murphy painting?
Oh, it's coming from the right.
Right, it's coming from the
Coming
right.
on the right. It's coming
Yeah.
from the right on the back of the
The
horses.
horse's back.
Raking light.
Right.
Should I put my hand up or?
No, just
I find both of the pictures really interesting as far as what the artist is, what his design was, because there's two different levels going on in both of these works. You've got the circus theme in both of them. Obviously, the McCurry work is really not about the circus. There are elephants in the background, but the woman in the front, you're being drawn, your attention's drawn to her by the white stick that the man who's handling the elephant in the background, she's turned away to the side. So there's so much different tension and feelings that are going on in that one, with the figure forward and frontal, you know, right in the front of the work. And then the Murphy on the left, it looks like it's about the circus, but then you've got the performers in the front that are making eye contact with you. That sets up a whole different attitude and feeling about what's this going on in the center ring, you know. So it makes you realize that the artist had to have planned this out, you know, that he's placed the figures very specifically in this. And he's trying to create a mood more than just present, this is my own opinion, more than just the feeling of the circus.
great. And other comments?
I think
Yes.
the sense of mystery about her.
Mhm.
Why is she there? What, you know, what is she looking at? Is she looking at something? She looks sad to me in some
Mhm.
respects, and mysterious.
She's very disconnected from
Yeah.
the action of the circus. Whereas the other painting in the Murphy, there's direct engagement with the activity going on, movement with the spectator.
I really like what you said, Mark, about a work of art being the artist trying to answer some questions. And I'm linking it to what you said very early in the talk about finding some commonalities between the works of art. I think that helps people who are that you're talking with, the people coming to learn about the collection. It helps them to see some commonalities between the painting. And if you talk about concepts such as answering questions, that's one of the ways to do it. In our collection, for example, there are things that are really technical. There you go, that one, the Aneskovich, and also the McCallum, you know, where they're really working out technical challenges and answering the questions of working out, you know, ways to see things technically. And can, if you take boards and you paint exactly the same width of stripes, but in different colors, can you make people feel different emotions? It's a technical challenge. Versus artists, other artists in our collection, we're really playing on your emotions and trying to elicit emotional responses. And maybe it's the artist expressing his emotion. So I think, you know, I think organizing things in similarities helps attendees, but I also really like that phrase of helping an artist answer a question.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, let's jump to the next slide then, Petra. Thank you. Right, so as Barb just mentioned, the Richard Anaskevich, there are two, and they're enormous, and they're right as you come in, so you can't miss them at the Van Wezel. And this digital image actually looks pretty darn good because it's really hard to light these, and you can see in this digital image how much command that Anaskevich has about knowing about optics and color theory and geometry and form and physics and abstraction. These are two really wonderful works in the collection, and they're complementary, so you can talk about them individually, but also as a group. And I also want to bring up here that I think one way I've found to connect with an audience is to, of course, you find out ahead of time who they are and where they're coming from, but then once they get there, maybe some small talk about, what their backgrounds are and what their interests are. You might have a doctor, you might have a chemist, you might have a mathematician, you might have a kindergarten teacher, I don't know. But whatever it is, when you can get a little bit of information about the group, if it's not too big, then I've always found that helps me to then pull from my knowledge about the collection and try to bring in topics that might interest them. And so if somebody was a scientist and understood about chemistry, and or was a mathematician, understood about geometry, you can pull that into your discussion of the topic. So that brings me to my point that I really think that the best artists also know something about science. I used to hear over and over again at Ringling College that there was this whole left brain, right brain thing, and artists were more one than the other. And I mean, I'm sorry, but I really feel that the artists I know are both. They may lean more to one than the other, but if you're going to make geometric paintings, you need to know math and you need to know geometry. And if you're going to make paintings that are historical, you need to know history. If you're going to make paintings that reference literature, you have to know about literature, or you're just not going to get it right. So let's go to the next slide. And I think one of the artists that in the Renaissance and no one's ever been a Leonardo da Vinci, is Leonardo da Vinci. And he was primarily a scientist. And the reason that his images of people were so confounding was that he understood anatomy, biology, the human body. He had dissected them. He understood weather, atmosphere. He just understood everything. And it's so rare for someone to have all that knowledge. But it was also his downfall as an artist because like a scientist, he was constantly experimenting and trying different things. So this fresco would have been painted traditionally alla prima with ground colors mixed with egg yolk on white plaster, wet plaster. Before the plaster dried on the wall, you'd put all the pigment on and then it would sink into the plaster and be basically cemented to the wall. But we know from analysis that Da Vinci always experimented, and he mixed the paint with ash in the Last Supper and some other materials, which I don't quite remember. But anyway, it caused the fresco to deteriorate. Has anyone ever seen this in person?
Is this the one in Milan?
Yes, it's in Milan. It's in, yeah.
Yes, we went to see it
Okay. Did you see it after it was restored or before?
after.
Okay. Well, this was taken after. I was fortunate to see it in 1985 when they just began the restoration, and the painting is 9 feet high and 15 feet wide, and it's in this very small room, which was basically where people ate. And so while you were eating, you would look and see this painting of the Last Supper on the wall. And again, it has this kind of energy has a presence. I encourage you to go and see it. Can I see the next slide, please?
Could I ask you a question? You said he did ash. Was that new? Was that different? You didn't explain why you mentioned that.
He mixed ash in with the paint. Well, no, we don't know why, but he somehow he thought it would be a good binder, but the binder really is the egg yolk that was used.
Okay.
You know, so not many of his frescoes survived. They fell off the wall, mostly because he didn't prepare the surface properly, and he didn't use it properly. So when I saw this, it was like a ghost painting, and there were about 24 little 1-inch squares of color all over the surface that the conservator was starting to do tests with before she could actually restore it to what you're seeing now. But the reason I'm also showing it to you is because of what I was talking about math and science. And we know that during the Renaissance, scientists or people like Da Vinci began to understand perspective and vanishing point. And so in Da Vinci's work, he didn't make this drawing on the right, but that was made by somebody to explain the composition on the left, which involves creating a vanishing point behind Christ's head. And so all the lines in the painting focus you on that. And I'm bringing this up again because if you look at any painting in the Arts Advocates collection, you can all sort of in your mind superimpose a grid over it that's made up of triangles, rectangles, circles, ellipses, whatever it is, to help you try to understand the composition. And if the artist actually used that sort of as a ground for the composition, and then talk to your audience about that, or the visitor. Okay, so now let's go back to engagement. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so here we have 2 paintings in the collection that are about engagement, about community, about people coming together for an occasion. And even without knowing the titles, we can figure that out by deconstructing what's going on in the 2 paintings. So does anybody want to respond to these? You like them? What do you like about them?
Well, I like the left because it's a little loose in terms of the actual painting. It seems like it's not, the media is not very rich. I mean, maybe it's because we're looking at a picture of the painting, but I like the sort of almost illustration look of this.
Okay, somebody else?
I like Sunday afternoon because I think there's a great deal of feeling in it. It's very peaceful, restful, the way Sunday's supposed to be.
Okay. Well, I mean, these give you an opportunity to talk about reference and narrative and how people can, make up their own story about what's going on in either one of these paintings. And because the one on the right has a house in it, it looks like a place where, well, people have gathered for many, many years because the house is very old. And if you look at Sunday afternoon, that's sort of traditionally when people get together with their families. So now I want to bring up the idea that looking at art is about a conversation. It is about engagement, and we can't expect everyone to like every painting. And I think that when you walk into a gallery, it's like walking into a cocktail party where you don't know anybody, and you sort of are looking around for something that attracts you. It could be the bar, it could be a person you think you recognize. Maybe you do recognize somebody at the party, and you will make your way through the crowd to get to them and start engaging with them. But if you don't know anybody, you're attracted to somebody to just start a conversation, and you have to figure out how to start that conversation. And sometimes it's about what they're wearing or what they're drinking or what you overheard them say, and then you start the conversation. And you start to learn about them through that engagement. And I think when we're looking at works of art, we're doing that with our eyes. We're looking for something that seduces us to cross the room and look at it, and then to learn more about it. And really the artist's job in presenting you with a work of art is giving you the tools within the work of art to determine why they made that work of art and what it's about. You know, that's the artist's responsibility as they're making it, so that you have some clues to find out what it is that the artist wants you to think about or contemplate or envision or wonder about, or just to revel in.
Mark?
I think Sunday afternoon does that really well, because certainly one commonality in all of our art in the collection is that it's got something to do with Florida. The artist lived here, worked here, born here, something. And this is obviously a very old Florida house. You know, it's raised up so the air can be underneath, and it's got windows in the front and back so it can go through, because you don't have air conditioning in this old house. And, you know, as Donna said, it's peaceful, but for me, it's also historic. It's old Florida. And just that
Absolutely, I agree.
That feeling of the tree, and you know, there's Spanish moss on it, and it's just all Florida-ish. It's just, I don't know, for me, it's sort of enveloping and warm and old and historic Florida.
Okay, I think I have some details. Could you have the next slide, Petra, please? Okay, this gets you. Of course, if we were standing in front of it, everybody could practically put their nose on the painting, and that's what's so frustrating about these pixels. And the other thing I think that maybe people don't think about, but when we're having this conversation and looking at a pixelated image, can we go to the next one, Petra? Is that the problem with digital images or photographs of works of art is that they're static, and the camera has frozen. We're talking about moments in time. Well, depending on the shutter speed, this could have been frozen 1/250th of a second. 1/250th of a second. We can't even conceptualize that. It's so fast. So of course, what that does is it freezes all the elements of the work of art in that tiny fraction of time, when in fact, when we're standing in front of it, because the artist spent a week, 2 weeks, who knows how many hours in front of the painting with a brush and a palette and putting dabs of paint on the surface. And when we stand in front of it, our eyes can curse over the surface and enjoy and relive that experience the artist had making it, which is so exciting. And as we shift in front of it and our eyes blink and someone walks in front of us and there's a shadow or whatever, it changes. So the work of art is animated and it's constantly changing when it's an original. And that's why we collect original works of art, for that reason. And this is also a record of that total experience by the artist. And we own that. And we can look at it over and over again, and we can share it with other people. And I think that's very exciting.
Mark, I also would say it's three-dimensional. I mean, whereas this is not. Even when the painting doesn't look as though it's three-dimensional, it actually is.
Right, exactly. Very good point. And that's why, if you think about it, the painting looks different every time you look at it, because our mind cannot imprint every square inch of the painting in such a way that we can recall it when we turn away and look back at it. we can't do that, which is exciting too, which makes owning original art so exciting, I think, or having it to look at. Because our minds cannot remember every square inch of the canvas in the same way that it was conceived. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so this is a less complicated painting to look at, but I think it's a very exciting one. I really do like this painting a lot. It's 5 feet high. It's a big painting. So does anybody want to respond to the decisions the artist made about what to put in and what to leave out of this painting, and what sort of feeling you get when you look at it? And how the composition helps you to feel a certain way or think a certain way?
It's like crescendo.
Right.
The background being white draws attention to the figure in the center. You've got a strong diagonal line that adds excitement. It's either going up or back down to the figure. The fact that he's in black really focuses your attention towards him. And then his position, the fact that he's leaning back just in such a dramatic way is, the stick that he's holding gives you the indication that he's a conductor. And so it adds just this element of excitement when you look at it, even though it's very static.
Always makes me smile because I think he's having such a wonderful time. He's looks
In the
like he's
moment.
really enjoying what he's doing. He's all wrapped up in it.
It reminds me of Leonard Bernstein, of course, the way he used to conduct. But Donna, isn't it interesting that one of the first impressions I had was the left hand as a ballet, almost looks like a ballet move, doesn't it? I mean, again, you see what you see. I mean, everybody sees something different, but I thought that was, I mean, it is very dynamic, but I just noticed his left hand also remind me of the ballet dancer. There is a sense of movement in this. I like this one very much too.
So
Well,
I,
some conductors do dance around.
Yeah, oh, and how, right.
So I'm curious, does anybody hear anything when they see this? Does this painting take anyone to a place in their memory where they can hear something?
No.
No.
I feel like there's a lot of energy, and the way he's holding it, it's a loud sound, crescendo. I'm not sure if it means that, but I feel like it's loud, like we're high on energy and high on the sound. The orchestra is playing very either loud or energetic. I'm not sure, but it just seems like it with the movement and everything.
And his
I
left
think it-
hand with the pointed fingers up means he's
Yeah.
pulling up the sound to make it louder,
Yeah.
generally. So
I think it's like the last movement of Beethoven's Ninth started.
So does anybody think that he took any liberties with the composition and the elements of it?
Oh, yes, his
Exaggeration.
right arm is elongated.
his hands are elongated.
His right arm is elongated, right?
He'd
And
be
that's
falling
not-
over. He couldn't be in that position for sure.
That's
Well,
not,
part of the body is not there.
Are we frozen?
Yeah. No, I think it's great. It's great in its simplicity. And of course, it's perfect for the Van Wezel because people have
Petra, we're
coming out of a concert. Maybe they would hear something if they looked at it after the concert or in the intermission.
Mark, there are some lines. Oh, I think I'm not muted.
Oh, okay, Christy.
what year did he paint this, do you know?
Now, this is unfortunate. I want to go and look at behind all these paintings and check for dates because a lot of them aren't dated. And I'm guessing there must be some dates on the back of them.
Well, if he did this very young, like in the 20s or 30s, I think it'd be very unusual for him to have painted a black conductor at that time. So I think that's interesting too.
Okay, could we have the next slide, please? Okay, so another thing that I always found exciting about tours is that whatever's going on in the world, when the day you're giving the tour,
We
somehow,
didn't get the next slide.
Yeah, we did.
There.
Yeah,
I can see it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can see it.
it's there.
It's the next slide for me.
Mhm.
Ben Stahl.
Ben Stahl.
Yeah. Oh,
Thunder on the beach.
Mhm.
Okay, so so I think that, you know, whatever's going on in the world somehow contextualizes the works of art in some way, and I think it can always be interesting to try to tie in that with your tour, and with this painting, because it's called Thunder on the Beach, and if you consider what's going on right now, what would you have to say about this painting? Anybody?
Miami Beach.
Too much contagion.
Pretty good party going on there.
It's like Miami Beach.
Yeah,
Wow,
no masks, no social distancing.
right.
Yeah, and our beach was closed for a while too. So
Most analysts think that this is an allegory on the start of World War II. You know, with some people like the guy looking up at the sky and the girl right behind him in the center right, they're looking at the thunderstorms gathering, but the nun, therefore the Catholic Church, has turned her back on what's happening in the approach of World War II. We can assume that the lady in the front, who also is ignoring the storm clouds and has wine in front of her, might be French, and they kind of ignored what was happening as well. And possibly that's the ugly American also ignoring it. And you know, who knows whether any of that's true or not, but there's certainly a storm coming in this. And I just read several analyses that refer to that linkage to World War II, is the start or the coming.
yes, well, and people certainly are packed in there and in the tent too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, sort of like a camp.
okay, yeah. Is anybody else had any response to this?
Or maybe it's just a beach picture.
Well, the figures are quite distorted. I mean, you got a lot of chubby people in there, and it's certainly not idealized as it might have been during the Renaissance when people were perfect, like the David, for example, which is so is perfection. Here you have people who are very imperfect.
For sure, for sure.
Maybe it refers to the Holocaust.
Oh, wow.
Did Ben Stahl write about this?
Well, he was very religious, I think, which is why you have the nun in it. He was, but he also did so much commercial work in New York before he moved to Sarasota. So he had to really respond to all the events of the day for the magazines he was doing illustrations for. Okay, let's move on to the next work, please.
Whoop.
Okay, so this work really is a complete escape. Now we're looking at an abstract work. And I think that abstract art is challenging for most people. That's been my experience. I'd like to hear those of you who've given tours what your experience is. And I think it's because they can't find anything they recognize in the painting. They can't find anything they have in common with what they're looking at. And for a lot of people, not knowing is frightening, and the unknown is frightening. And we say that about life, but it's true with people looking at art too. I've had some experiences where people really got angry at me because I was talking about abstract work, and they just were, one man, it was a docent, at the Ringling Museum, and he started getting very red, and I said, Ed, what's the matter? He said, what is this? Why are we looking at this? This is not art. And so I said, well, Ed, let's talk about it after our docent program here. And but he was just angry because he couldn't wrap his head around anything in the abstract work at all. So I think that's a particular challenge when you're giving tours, is trying to help people find a way into an abstract work of art. And that's when I try to get people to talk about what we're looking at and say, you know, what do you see here? So let me ask you, if any of you respond to this, what it is you respond to about it.
I will say a few things. So I'm an abstract painter myself, so I know how hard is it to explain, or at least I know how hard is it for me to explain what's in my paintings, because it is very similar to this. So for me, I always look for textures. I look for the mood of the energy of the colors, how they come together. And that is in my art myself. Like I paint energy, I paint what's in my mind. I try to put it on a canvas to kind of get rid of it out of my mind, which is how Janet said, the blurting out. That is for me, I just need to get it out, that energy of that idea. But it's usually the color scheme. So I look for the color scheme in abstract art often, and of the layers, the texture of what's being used on a canvas. So that's just my few sentences about this.
That's great. That's great. That's great to hear an artist talk about their work, or another artist's work, and talk about abstraction.
Thank you.
Can you explain to me, coming from New York and going to the Museum of Modern Art, when I see paintings that are gigantic and they're all white, they're all black, I don't understand. I really honestly don't understand it. Saying what you said, I can't identify with those paintings at all. Can you explain that?
Okay, well, one of my favorite artists, Jeanette, is Robert Ryman, who only paints with white paint. And
solid white paint?
All white. So Jeanette, you would have loved his retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art, because there was just room after room after room of white paintings. But the reason I like his work is because of what Petra said, is that every painting is unique, and they're about what he does with the white paint. And none of the shades of white are the same either. And he never applies the white paint the same way on two canvases. He reinvents his mark with the paintbrush and the white paint on every canvas is different. So it's about texture, but even though it's white, it's also about shadow, and it's about reflection, and it's more about his process, but it's also about the abstract ideas of layering, of light, of shadow, of just sort of the abstract conversations the brush marks are having on the canvas with each other, and how he arranges them. So I think when we're giving tours of abstract work, as Petra pointed out, I think it's important to get into the process, to get into this idea of energy and light and color and harmony or disharmony. Everything doesn't have to be harmonic. A painting can be about discord. It can be about things that are colors that are joyful or colors that are somber. And then that brings up the idea of a mood or a disposition. Or it can be about light. I mean, Rothko's paintings are essentially about light, even though a lot of them have a lot of color in them. They're really about light emanating through the color from the canvas. So it's tough, but if you think about it, we all know some people are concrete thinkers. They think more things have to be in black and white. And then we know people who are more abstract thinkers, who like to talk about concepts and can talk in all shades of gray, right? So, right, we know people like that. So the same thing is true of art. I think that, you know, some people who like art, they like to recognize it and they feel comfortable with what they know, and then other people are much more open to just sort of like in this painting, just sort of diving into it and exploring what it is that the artist was doing with the paint on the surface, and what can I find in this painting that I like, or that attracts me, or that makes me want to look at it more. Other people say, nope, and move on. Not looking at that, don't care, move on. You know, it's just
Which
like
is fine.
okay, artists, all kinds of people.
Mark,
Yes.
Mark, you and I once started to have a conversation about the difference between abstract and non-representational. Do you want to speak to that for a minute?
Why don't you talk about it for a second and I'll jump in.
Well, to me, this is technically non-representational. Abstract to me, in the strictest sense, is that you can recognize objects in it, but it's abstracted. They're simplified.
Okay, right. And then, so then I would even use the word referential, because you could have an abstract painting in which there's a reference, as you just pointed out, where, say, a cubist painting, which you could say is cubist and geometrically abstract, might reference a figure or still life or something like that. Whereas a pure abstraction, which is how I would define this, because I can't see any point of reference in this. Maybe somebody else can, but I can't. To me, this is a purely abstract painting, which is the contemplation of color and forms. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's a good contemplation of color and form. That's good.
Okay.
I like that.
Does anybody else want to respond to this painting?
Just look at the title.
Yeah, well, see, that I will jump in and say that I think that some artists title their work after they make it because they need to describe it somehow. And so it's a point of reference for them more than it is as a way into the painting. Of course, it then functions as a way for the visitor, if they look at the label, to enter into the painting. But I still stand by, once the artist releases the work, it's got to stand on its own without a label. I really believe that. Okay, the next slide, Petra, please. So here in the next one, we go back to a work that's referential. And we see these walking around, these great blue herons. And that looks like it's probably going to be lunch or dinner. Little creature there at the bottom, which is very disconcerting to watch. The first time I saw that, I was quite upset for a while. But this is a document of life forms that exist here in Sarasota, done on a piece of slate, which is a whole other challenge for an artist to command as a material. So I think people can make up a story about this however they like. It's less challenging than the painting we just looked at. Okay, the next one, please. Okay, this is a very large work, if you've seen it, and Dorothy Gillespie used this material. It was her mark, and I think that every artist struggles to find their mark, you know, whatever that is, like the way they make a brush stroke, the colors that they prefer to use, the materials they prefer to use, and how they manipulate those materials. And once you've seen a few Dorothy Gillespie's, you can look around and recognize her work because she does, this is her mark. She works with painted aluminum, and she creates these ribbon-like forms, and she combines them in really interesting compositions, often on small scale and large scale. They're very animated, they're very energetic, and usually they're very joyful. So let's just, I'm going to talk for a second about the word docent. It comes from the Latin word docere, which means to teach, which is really what Stephanie said earlier. You know, we want to teach people. That's why we've asked them to join us in these tours. And it also comes from another Latin word, which is educare, which means to bring up or train, mold, or nourish. And then there's a third word, educere, which means to lead out. So if you take any or all of those words, that's what we do. We try to nourish people. We try to lead them to an understanding of art, and to bring them up and have them reach a higher understanding of what artists do to make our lives more enjoyable. The other thing I think I always try to keep in mind when I'm giving a tour is as I'm looking at them, as they're looking at me speaking, is am I seeing curiosity in their eyes? You know, I think one of the challenges when you're giving a tour is to try to keep people curious about what you're talking about and what you're looking at, which really means trying to engage them in some kind of response with respect to what you're looking at on your tour. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, so I have an advantage here because I've actually seen this in person because you just bought this, and only a couple people have seen it. So this is a new addition to the collection by Jimmy Ernst, and it's a very exciting work. And we bought two. We bought this one made in '58, and we bought a painting on panel made in '61, which you'll see in a few minutes. And Jimmy Ernst wasn't represented in the collection. His work is unique. The surface is unlike anybody else. You talk about mark making. You couldn't count the number of marks that he made on this surface. I think he would admit to being an obsessive compulsive artist with respect to materials and his compositions and the complexity of them. Bold use of color. Anybody have any response to this work?
The gray areas look to me like cut glass.
I think it's filled with energy. I see those gold balls kind of just hovering in space, but being almost electrified by the lines that are projecting out from it. And the red color below just sort of generates energy as you look at the work.
It almost looks like a landscape, and that's sort of the sky and the water.
Yeah, it's a very complicated, like we talk about geometry and planes of space and vanishing points. It's a very complicated work of art. And I'll tell you, here's another issue. This is the photograph that they sent when we were contemplating the purchase. And you can see sort of some milky, you see those milky areas in the red?
Right, in the front.
Kind of milky. And I'm concerned about those. And I talked to the dealer and I said, what's going on there? And she hadn't seen the work since it was reframed. They bought this from the person who bought it. The gallery did, Graham Gallery in New York. And I said, well, I'm concerned about that. And she said, oh, I'll go and look at it. So she went to the warehouse and looked at it again. And then she explained that those are reflections that are bouncing off of the museum glass, which was new to it and put to cover it. So, but we made sure that we saw it in person before we actually purchased it. But again, this is the challenge of the digital imagery. And when you see this, the red is so intense. And the gallery said that, red is usually a fugitive color in most palettes, especially when works on paper. But this one somehow, because of how Jimmy used the red, it's as fresh as if it was painted last week. So it's very exciting. Okay, let's go into the next one. So this is a much larger painting. Some of you have probably seen this before. It's called Amalfi, but you recognize what it's a depiction of. And Barbara, here's a painting that I would say is done by an artist who takes what is recognizable as a point of reference and then abstracts every inch of the canvas in the painting by using the idea of what the title suggests. But then as you look at it up close, it's an additive painting of almost all these little tiny individual paintings that are, an inch by an inch, that all add together to give this illusion of the Amalfi Coast. And so this is a really exciting painting to talk about, I think, and Barb and anybody who's talked about it, maybe if you want to jump in here and tell me kinds of experiences you've had with the audience and looking at the painting. Have you had any strong reactions to this? Barb, are you still there?
Sorry, I am here. When I first started, I did different paintings, different works. You can't do all of them or you'd be there
of course
all
not.
day.
No. Yeah.
And people just didn't react to this at all.
Really interesting. Okay.
It just was like, okay, it's more water like Sarasota. It's a different kind of coastline. That they weren't really engaged, and so I kind of dropped it.
Okay, well, that's fair. No, I think you have to keep your audience's attention, and if they're just looking in the other direction, you have to move on.
Exactly. I mean, for example, with the boat, the Corbino, the disaster picture, the refugees one, where they're falling out of the boat, and people engage with. I mean, they were nervous about it, anxious about the people, very engaged. This is so. I mean, it isn't static really because the water is moving, but that it didn't seem to hold anyone's interest or have much to talk about, because I would always say just a few words and then ask questions and try to elicit responses. And I got pretty much nothing.
Well, I guess, all right, if I was challenged with that kind of response, I think I might compare this to maybe a Persian carpet, like a Persian silk carpet where the weave was really tight, but there were all these rainbow of colors in it. And so if you looked at the back of it, you would see that it, how it was made and how it was stitched together using all these individual threads in different colors to create the pattern on the reverse. Because I think that this is a painting where, again, it's hard to do here in the digital slide, but you could impose a grid over this of squares, and you could look at each square of this painting and see how, you know, like a carpet, it's the sum total of all of these individual areas of the painting. And so that's Bruce's process. I mean, and he's in Ruskin. I'm sure he would come and talk to the group when we can do that again, because it's interesting to hear him talk about it. So he challenges himself, even though he uses photography as a reference, to then create something unique in the painting. So the painting, again, while it may look like the photograph from a distance, it's really about his individual investigation of all those moments in nature, which again, if we're looking at a moving body of water and waves coming up against some rocks, we can't stop it from happening. You know, we can't freeze it. What we enjoy is the rhythm of it. But if you're going to try to document it, you have to figure out how to do that. How do you halt nature? How do you stop movement? How do you capture color that's constantly changing because of the light going through the water and down to what's below the rocks, or the shadows that are created by the clouds overhead? So, you know, I guess you could talk about weather and nature and the experience of water. And but again, if people don't respond, then again, you just have to move on. So
I probably didn't put it in as exciting terms as you just
well,
did. Now I'm engaged.
well,
But,
you know, that's my job today, to try to really analyze these like under a microscope in a way.
Very photographic too.
Yeah, it's sort of, yeah. But again, you could also talk about like how our eyes work, and how something can look one thing from a distance, and then when we get up close, it becomes completely fragmented. You know,
It's representational, but it's also abstract. It's sort of a combination. I
absolutely,
feel.
absolutely.
I think the colors, I love it. I think it's terrific.
Makes you feel cool, like you're looking at abstraction.
Yeah, it's okay. Let's move on to Steve's work. Okay, another enormous painting, 12 feet high. So much color, so much going on. It's the largest painting in the collection. Just kind of overwhelms you when you're looking at it. You can see it from a distance, and then when you're up in front of it, you have to look up at it, and it's monumental. Does anybody want to respond to this?
Perfect title.
Yeah, good title.
I had to look up turgid.
Okay.
Bombastic.
Punching out at you like a Baroque painting.
Okay, so let's talk about how many planes of space do you think are in this painting? Can we even count them?
No.
No.
Infinitesimal.
Right.
And his technique of making this is amazing, with the taping and the painting and the taping and the painting.
Right, the layers and layers and layers and layers.
And he puts tape on and then paints, and more tape and more paint. So I guess that was the technical challenge for him.
For sure. So if you had some, I think this is a fair question to ask people, whether they answered or not in your audience, to say, would you say you're more an abstract thinker or a concrete thinker? And then you could ask the abstract thinkers, what if they think this painting is a metaphor for anything, and what that might be. Where does this take them as an abstract thinker? What mood does it convey? A mood? I mean, is this about order, or is this about chaos? Or about ordered chaos?
Chaos.
Chaos.
However, in order for Steve to make it, he had to he had to structure it in a way, right? I mean, this could be like, Jeanette, you mentioned partly a kind of blurt out. There's probably things that he didn't know in the beginning he was going to do that maybe he did at some stage as he was creating these layers. It wasn't planned. So we don't know. I mean, I haven't asked him about it, so I don't know.
I've heard some reactions as 9/11.
Hmm.
Wow.
Looks like a roadway in the back, like a spaghetti junction.
When I was working at the Ringling Museum and giving tours, and working with the education department, I always worked very closely with the education department. When I first got there, the education department told me that most people at that time, this was 20 years ago, spent an average of 3 seconds in front of a painting when they were on their own. So the great thing about people being interested in the docent tour is that they're committing themselves to spending more than 3 seconds. Otherwise, you'll be giving very short tours. And I think when I give tours, I try to impress on people that, especially when they're looking at a painting like this, if you like something about it, let's give it some time. Because if you think about how much time the artist spent making it, I think it deserves, a few minutes of contemplation, if you like it, if you're attracted to it on some level, because you'll discover more and more about it. And then you'll either like it more or you won't. But paintings deserve, and sculptures, all works of art deserve more time than usually we're willing to give them for us to have that conversation, to have that engagement with the works that are being presented to us. I used to joke with my friends who worked in the performing arts, especially people who worked at Van Wezel. I said, what would you think of we sell out the Van Wezel for 2 hours, like actually we're doing here, and people are seated in their chairs, and then we'll just walk out paintings and put them on stage and leave them there for 5 or 6 minutes for people to just contemplate, Because if you think about it, if you're watching a dance performance or Beethoven or contemporary music or whatever, you buy a ticket and you sit there for the program, and if you sit through a whole symphony, it could be 45 minutes, and you sit there and you pay attention. And so I think that's always one of the challenges, is to make art attractive for people to do the same thing.
Mark,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
one thing that I think is time is really important, that you let your visitors come up close and look at the surface of the artwork. And even if you want to do it with pairs, 2 people have an opportunity to look at it together, that begins a conversation. And because description of what they're seeing, sometimes with really abstract art, I say to my group, I want you to imagine you're on a cell phone with your best friend. Tell them what you're looking at, because that description there really helps them to process and put it into words, and then they can start talking about it. Well, I see this and I see that, and then that helps with the analysis of what they're looking at. But coming up close to the canvas and looking at it's really important.
I think that's a great point. And you're making me think also that I think we have to remember that, while some people are interested in who made it and who they were married to and where they came from and all of that, to really help people understand what we're looking at, we have to talk from the frame in, which I think Stephanie is saying, that we have to point people toward what they can actually see, and then focus on that and try to talk about that and about it. I thought you also made a great point about pairs, because in my experience, while some people like to go to museums and galleries alone, most people go with another person. And so looking at art is a social experience for most people, and it's about them having a good time by going with somebody they know and talking through the visit, but hopefully being inspired by the art to start a conversation as well. And I think as docents, that's part of our responsibility, is to get people in groups and pairs and get them to start talking, so that when the tour is over, they will continue talking about what they saw and what they learned. And as I said, I often I hope to learn from individuals that I'm giving tours of. So
It's
okay.
really important to establish a comfort level with your group too, that they don't feel they're put on the spot. So if they get to describe something, they're not being asked about art history or how did they do it or whatever. It's just, well, let's talk about what you see there. And that begins to get people talking. And some people will say, well, I see this. And other people will say, I see that. And that begins a conversation just within your group too. And that really helps to encourage people to feel comfortable about talking. They're not gonna, there is no wrong answer because it's about your impressions and feelings. So.
Great. Yeah, I agree with that totally. Okay, good. If you see the next one, please, Petra. Okay, so here's another abstract work by Sid Solomon. It's a smaller painting. He painted outdoors a lot. He had that studio on Siesta Key that I mentioned, and he painted inside, but he also painted outside. And he was very interested in the weather here and nature and light and the colors here. He's somebody that, I've looked at a lot of his work, and I think he's used every color in the rainbow in his paintings. Can we go to the next one, please? Okay, so here's another large abstract painting that's untitled. So no point of reference here. Pure abstraction.
A dog on the right.
I'm sorry?
It looks like a dog. You see the eye and the nose on the right.
I see that.
A white dog.
Okay.
Barbara, hi. Do you see your dog there?
Yes, I do see the dog.
You see?
I do see the dog. But it doesn't have to be a dog. I mean, it could be a cow or a sheep.
Or a fish.
No, I think it's a dog.
I think it's flowers and bees.
I like this painting a lot.
So how do the vertical lines function in the painting for you?
Kind of keep you from going into the painting. They stop you right when you hit them. You have to kind of weave your way around them to see what's behind.
Barricade.
It gives a feeling of looking out from in to me, that there's some sort of barrier there.
Yeah, they do act as a barrier, as the two of you said, but some of the lines that stop midway, I think, draw your eye into it. The ones that go all the way to the top, the lines that go all the way to the top, draw your eye all the way up, but the halfway ones put you right into that smoke cloud on the right and right into the colors on the left. And
it's a little confusing because your eyes are usually drawn to the lightest areas of a painting, and which for me is on the left-hand side, that cloudy area down there, but then you're stopped by the gray lines, and then where do you go from there? It's like the next light area is up to the very right, but there's a dark center to it. Kind of your eyes just really wander around trying to make sense of what you're looking at.
Somebody have a parrot?
Yes, sorry. I
No,
should
no,
mute.
it's fine. I love parrots. I love parrots.
We have an African gray parrot, and he likes to get on the on his high horse when he hears this.
Fine. No, Mabel Ringling had an African gray. She loved it. So, I think the Ringling should keep one at the Katazan, African gray, channel Mabel Ringling. Okay, could we have the next slide, please, Petra? So sometimes when I'm looking at abstract painting, I like to bring in references to earlier artists who really sort of paved the way for this acceptance of pure abstraction. And of course, you go back to the Impressionists in the late 19th century. And so Monet with the whole haystack series he did in 1890 and 91, where the painting, yes, it does have a reference to a haystack, and he had them right outside and around his house. So he could be inspired by their forms and the different light conditions at different times of the day and different times of the year that inspired him to approach the same subject matter and paint it over and over again. And then we also have Whistler, whose work is more referential, but he really did that as a vehicle to contemplate color and arrangements of color. So this title of this painting is called Arrangement in Gray and Black. Number one, most people call it Whistler's mother, because it was his mother, but we see this sort of transition happening from more realistic work that's about the realism of depicting the subject matter that the artist is looking at, to a contemplation of light and color, which is really what these two artists were interested in as they approached their work. So that gives some assurance sometimes to people. Most people know this Whistler's mother. Maybe not everybody knows the haystacks. But it was these artists that sort of paved the way for Glenna Finch and Sid Solomon. And then the next artist we're looking at, please, the next slide. You know, Wilfrid Laurent, who came here in the 40s from Ohio and painted this site. This is where the Van Wezel is today. He painted it before there was any construction on that site. And it's a very soupy watercolor, lots of water, not so much pigment on the brush when he applied it to the paper, and creating basically an impression of that landscape, which you could say, you know, harkens back to Monet's early Impression paintings from 1872. So there is a tradition and a history to this approach to painting, and recording something that doesn't exist anymore in a very unique manner. So again, I think that once we have time to go back into the Van Wezel, and everybody can look at all the paintings again and think about how they want to, you know, what themes they are most comfortable talking about and which paintings they want to focus on in their tour. I think it always makes the best tour to talk about the paintings that you like the best, has been my experience. Okay, so the next slide, please. Okay, so we saw this before. This is a Jerry Farnsworth. The painting on the right is Night Wind, and I just threw up the other two on the left to sort of say, you know, this whole idea of women in front of windows has been a theme in the past. The most immediate link to Farnsworth is probably the Edward Hopper painting in the bottom of a woman looking out the window, and she's got a chemise on, but and then the Vermeer painting of the woman reading a letter in front of an open window. So all these artists are interested in basic issues of light and shadow and atmosphere. And of course, Farnsworth's painting is at night, but there has to be a light source there because you can see half her body's in shadow. And I don't think it's the moon that is lighting up the left part of her torso. But there's visual information to give you a sense of mood, of temperature, of time of day. There's movement in the curtains. It's more than just a portrait of a woman. Okay, any responses about this figure?
I think it's beautiful. The use of color. So it's if you look at her body, the colors are all intermingled, but they're beautiful. I like it very much. The
Yeah,
use of color is so interesting here.
Okay, on the next one, please. Okay, there's several mixed media work in the collection, and that presents a challenge for the visitor too, because it's artists using materials in a way perhaps that they've never seen before. A painting, reverse painting on plexiglass in this instance, an abstract work. Of course, if you look at the label, you begin to see, well, what do you see when you look at it? Is there any reference to anything in this for you? Anybody?
Tall
crash.
tall building.
A building? Okay.
Well, Sinbad the sailor.
Yep.
And it could be a sailboat on the rocks.
That's it.
Okay.
Yes, it looks to me like a ship on the rocks.
Mhm.
It's like a schooner with a sail.
Elements of wood and water and greenery, you know, the five elements type of around us.
Yeah, and fire. The boat
Yes.
caught fire.
Yeah.
I think this is a wonderful combination of abstract but telling a story. It hit the rocks and it exploded, and this is a tragedy. But if you didn't know the title, it would be just abstract.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in the green, or no, sorry, not green, in the orange, kind of the wooden, there's like as if there is a bridge or maybe a building, or, you know, like the two the two shapes there. Now that I look at the Sinbad on the rocks, I'm thinking, yes, that could have been a bridge, and, you know, and a ship that ended up there. Yeah.
We lived on our boat. We lived and traveled on our boat for 5 years. That's my worst nightmare.
I would agree with you. I had a sailboat for a while too. Just looking at this abstractly, you could just talk about the literal collision of colors in this composition, as well as the collision of lines, particularly the vertical lines, sort of, and then this curved line at the bottom where everything seems to be emanating from. It's very dynamic, abstract composition, very turgid. You could use turgid to describe this one too, but not in purely linear form, but with areas of color. So, okay, let's go on to the next.
But Mark, think about the technique that he had to do with that, doing it in reverse.
Oh,
that
yeah.
Blows my mind, because you have to put I guess you would start with the near colors and then work back.
Yeah.
I just think the technique has to be so difficult.
A challenge, yeah. And the only one like it in the collection.
Yes.
Okay, the next work is another mixed media work, also incredibly complex, very evidence of a lot of time being spent on it. And even if I didn't put the title up there, you would think about what when you first look at it, if you're coming top to bottom. What reference is she making to? Is she referencing something?
Roots, history, a lot of layers of it, and a lot of elements to nature and what's around us, also with the colors.
with the colors. And what about the top part? What do you see? What does that remind you of, that triangle?
An altar.
An altar, yeah.
Empowerment, sacredness,
My goodness.
triangle, also balance and power, really, of a triangle, power.
Okay, I'm going to speed along here because I know time is almost up and I want to show you a couple more slides. So let's go to the next one, please. And I think I'll leave you with some food for thought. And because it's going to be recorded, I want to also make sure that you can look at all this again. So Calzada is also unique in the collection for his approach. And I can't imagine anybody who wouldn't find something appealing about this. And it's a puzzle, and you can help your visitor figure out what's going on here optically and with respect to perspective and so forth. And could we go to the next one? So this is another one like we talked about with the Last Supper, where this seems like maybe anybody could paint this painting, but it's very complicated and deals with a geometry and perspective and vanishing point. And there's a lot of math involved in the structure of Calzada's work.
He was an engineer first before he was an artist, and I think that certainly comes across.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Like De Chirico's work.
And
But I
then,
love, his color palette use with the blue and orange, which are opposite, and the squares and arches and.
yeah, so these are, if in your audience, you might find somebody involved with construction or who's building a house, or whoever built a house, or maybe they're an engineer or something, that you could elicit, some insight into the structure of this composition for your group. To Stephanie's point about engaging people to leave part of them, even particularly their voice, leave it in the space where you're giving a tour. Okay, the next one, please. Okay, this is a big Sid Solomon painting, but then I want to jump to the next one. The next slide, Petra, please. Okay, so here, now you could bring a color wheel with you, but here's an artist who literally uses the entire color wheel in most of his paintings. And I think it's partly what makes them exciting, is that consistently he does. And so this is a painting where, even though it has a reference, it's called Stravinsky, but he happened to paint it on the day Stravinsky died. I don't think you could find anything in the painting that specifically references Stravinsky or any of the music he composed, but nevertheless, there it is. And I think it's a painting to talk about color and color combination and an artist's mastery of color theory, frankly. And then jump ahead here.
But I do see, Mark, I do see Stravinsky in it.
You do? Okay.
When Stravinsky's music was first played, people got up and walked out because it was so jarring. And the way he has those colors, I mean, they're fractured, kind of like Stravinsky's music. Maybe maybe the crescendo is the yellow thing in the middle. I see that. I see Stravinsky.
Okay. All right. I want to talk to you about that in front of the painting next time we get to Ben Wesley. Okay.
Or just commit me, right?
Thank you. No. And I just wanted to show this one as the last painting. This is the other Ernst we bought. And I can't wait for you all to see this, because I think it's a gem of a painting and very exciting. So, well, keeping to your schedule, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I can't wait to be able to do it again in person, hopefully.